Next group of people are the retainers. All of the people we have thus far mentioned enjoyed power in a primary sense, which means that they have authority and power all their own. But there is another group of the society whose authority and power depends on these 1 or 2 percenters, and we call them retainers. So the retainers depend on the chimney stack. That's how the power goes. Power flows from top to bottom in this vertical society. And this is where we learn, the retainers, this is where we find most of the scribes. The scribes that operate in villages are found in that section right there where the chimney stack begins to widen out. Here too we find bailiffs, bureaucrats, and so-called tax farmers. And we're going to explore what that is in a moment. A tax farmer may seem like an odd term. What is that? Who were the tax farmers? Well, you got to think of somebody like Zacchaeus. You all remember the story of Zacchaeus in the Gospels, right? Tax farmers like Zacchaeus had worked out contracts with the Romans to collect taxes of a given region. And this is how it worked. Say a tax farmer wanted to be a tax collector, telones, or the architelones of a certain region. First, he would make a bid with the Romans. All right, I'll make a bid for 100,000 denarii, let's say. The Roman occupiers would allow that person to go out collecting whatever the hell he wanted. But no matter what he collected, he always owed Rome 100,000 denarii.
For that region?
Yep.
For his territory.
That's the bid. Anything beyond 100,000 denarii belonged to the tax farmer. Of course, it was impossible for the tax farmer to physically collect taxes and tolls from everybody in that region. What he had to do was hire a bunch of men to do this, and these men were the actual tax collectors, called in the New Testament telones. The tax farmer, like Zacchaeus, becomes an architelones, the chief arch tax collector. Your contract as architelones is worked out with the Roman occupiers. In your region, you control all the taxes and you set them all of the tolls on the roads, and all of the fishing industry, etc. These retainers, scribes, bureaucrats, lawyers, and tax farmers, derive their authority from those above them, the urban elite, the chimney. Retainers made up about 5% of the total population of Israel, and we find them all over the Gospels. Jesus interacts with tax collectors in the villages. Now we talk about the scribes, another group of retainers. The scribes were retainers that could read and write. They were the lawyers of antiquity. They are the bureaucrats and functionaries who carried out the designs of the Herodians and the lay aristocracy. For the most part, the scribes lived in cities, but not always. Almost no one in a village could read or write, and so a scribe was always required. We have evidence of scribes living in villages like Capernaum. Maybe 1 or 2 lower level scribes lived there. And they did all the writing and all of the contracts. They kept all of the records. They managed all of the documents that were necessary for normal life. And all of the transactions going on in that community went through these scribes, including all contracts. All of the transactions, all the contracts went through the scribes. Now I want you to consider this. If I can't read or write, and you, an outsider to my village, can, you realize that you're the enemy in my village? How do you think the villagers relate to the scribe living there?
Hate him.
They have to have him there, but they hate him. The peasant villagers couldn't read the contracts the scribes wrote, which they were bound to fulfill under Roman cruelty. You don't pay your taxes, Roman cruelty comes in, backing up that architelones. So in Jesus' culture, scribes were generally feared in peasant village life, but almost every village had a scribe that owed their allegiance not to the villagers, but to the urban elite in the chimney stack. Do you see the problem here? This is beginning to tell you the cauldron from which Jesus' stories come. Jesus himself not only interacts with scribes in the city of Jerusalem, he also interacts with them in villages who were there on behalf of the lay aristocracy. Remember all these stories? You know, where Jesus roundly slaps them upside the head with insults whenever they insult him. What's the greatest commandment, you dumb hick? That's why I'm asking you. I'm going to humiliate you now. And then Jesus says, have you never read? That's a slap right back on their face. I'm one of 2% of the people who can read. You can't read, you Galilean hick. How dare you do this to me, say this to me?